At St. Luke's Hospital in Jacksonville, Florida, on March 14, 2011, a dire situation unfolded. A 2-year-old boy named David Galarraga was brought in, limp and unresponsive. His condition demanded immediate and specialized care, yet his mother's explanation of the events raised more questions than answers. The hospital staff couldn't determine whether David's injuries were the result of a tragic accident or something far more sinister. Authorities were quickly involved, as police were called to investigate. They began by interviewing the family to unravel the mystery behind David's condition. The case quickly spiraled into a complex web of lies and half-truths, revealing a story so unsettling that it would go on to become a landmark case in Florida's criminal justice system. As medical professionals worked to save the toddler, police brought David's mother, Bonella Susanna, and his 12-year-old brother, Christian Fernandez, to the station for questioning. Investigators hoped to uncover the truth about what had really happened. With Christian being a minor, the police carefully explained his rights to ensure anything he revealed during the interview would be legally admissible. Christian appeared cooperative, though his age presented challenges in fully comprehending the gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, details from the initial hospital interviews began to emerge. According to police reports, Bonella displayed a surprising lack of emotion when doctors explained the severity of David's injuries. She allegedly remarked that she had been through worse, leaving law enforcement and medical staff perplexed. However, her demeanor shifted once she was brought in for questioning, revealing cracks in her story. When asked about the events of that evening, Bonella claimed Christian had rushed to her, saying David had fallen from the top bunk bed. She recounted how she found David unresponsive and attempted to help him by applying ice. Yet her account left investigators with lingering doubts. A search of the family's apartment painted a far grimmer picture. Inside the bedroom shared by the older children, police discovered a chilling scene. Bloodstains marked the carpet near a school backpack, with additional evidence of blood and vomit scattered throughout the room. The bottom bunk bed was strewn with baby wipes, a diaper, and blankets stained with red. The bathroom also bore traces of the tragedy, with red stains on the cabinet and shower curtain. As investigators pieced together the evidence, it became clear that David's injuries were far more severe than a simple fall could explain. The unsettling discoveries raised alarming questions about what had truly occurred in that home. The police knew they needed to gather as much information as possible, not only to uncover the truth but also to provide the doctors with crucial details to aid in their treatment of David. The horrifying reality of this case was beginning to surface, and the story that would emerge was one of unimaginable tragedy and betrayal. As the investigation deepened, detectives turned their attention back to Christian, the only witness who could shed light on what had truly happened to David. Sitting across from the young boy, they gently probed for details. If this story moved you, made you think, or shed light on the impact of trauma and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that uncover the hidden truths behind real-life events. Like this video if you believe in the importance of justice and second chances, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue to bring you stories that matter. Tonight, you and David were in your room, one investigator asked. Was anyone else there? Your other brother or sister? Christian hesitated. I think it was just us, he replied softly. What was your mom doing when this happened? The detective continued. I don't know, Christian stammered. Maybe she was driving. I'm not sure where she was. The inconsistencies began to pile up. While Bonella had initially claimed she was in the kitchen during David's fall, Christian's account didn't even place her at home. Detectives sensed there was more to uncover. Tell me a little bit about tonight, the investigator urged. Were you home when this incident happened? Christian nodded but remained vague about the details. He explained that after David fell, he laid his brother on the bottom bunk and tried to get help. Then I called my mom, he said. What did you tell her? The detective asked. Christian mumbled a response, his story shifting yet again. The detectives grew increasingly concerned, realizing that the accounts they were hearing didn't add up. Initially, Bonella had told hospital staff that Christian and David were watching television together. In a brief moment of distraction, David supposedly climbed the 5'2" bunk bed ladder, which suddenly shifted and caused him to fall and hit his head. But now, with Christian's new account, it seemed Bonella wasn't even present during the incident. Returning to Bonella, detectives pressed for clarity. "And you were home?" they asked. "Yes," she replied firmly. "You're definitely home." "Because I don't want to catch you in a lie," the investigator warned gently. "Were you home when this occurred?" Bonella hesitated, her resolve wavering. "Well, I had gone to the bank," she finally admitted. "So you weren't in the kitchen when this happened?" the detective confirmed. "No," she conceded. "So he called you on the phone, and you were at the bank?" the investigator clarified. "Yes," Bonella acknowledged. The truth began to surface. Bonella had left her 12-year-old son in charge of his 3 younger siblings while she ran errands. As a single mother of 4, she often relied on Christian to help manage the household. However, her initial dishonesty raised red flags for the investigators. "How long did it take you to get home after he called?" they asked. "I went right away," Bonella insisted. "I went to the ATM, and then I went back home." When she returned, she found David unconscious, just as Christian had described. But another alarming detail emerged during Christian's interview. "You said that she got on the computer before you went to the hospital," the detective asked him. "Yes," Christian confirmed. "Do you know what she was looking at?" the investigator inquired. "No," Christian replied. "Maybe a hospital to go to." "How long were you guys at home before you left to go to the hospital?" the detective pressed. "About 40 minutes, Christian answered. The detectives were stunned. Instead of immediately calling 911 or rushing her unresponsive child to the hospital, Bonella had waited nearly an hour. This revelation was deeply troubling. Upon David's arrival at the hospital, his condition was so critical that he was airlifted to another facility for specialized care. Medical professionals quickly determined that his severe injuries did not align with a simple fall from a bunk bed. Back at the station, Bonella tried to explain her hesitation. "I didn't want to call right away because after my husband passed away, they assigned me to a caseworker," she said, her voice strained. "The caseworker monitors everything. I'm afraid that if they think I'm doing something bad to one child, they'll take away my other 3. I don't want them taken away from me." Her fear of losing her children had caused her to delay seeking help, a decision that could have devastating consequences. As investigators delved deeper into the family's history, they uncovered a cycle of hardship and neglect. Bonella had been only 11 years old when she became pregnant with Christian. Court documents revealed that her mother struggled with substance abuse. Following Christian's birth, the trio moved frequently, staying in strangers' homes and hotels before eventually settling in a trailer without electricity or running water. When Christian was just 2 years old, authorities found him wandering naked through a parking lot in the early morning hours while his grandmother was supposed to be caring for him. She was charged with child neglect after being found intoxicated in a nearby hotel room. Inside, investigators discovered cocaine in Christian's baby bottle, which was infested with insects. After this harrowing incident, Bonella and Christian entered the foster care system together. Bonella, still a child herself, faced immense challenges as she navigated motherhood under the most trying circumstances. Now, years later, the shadows of the past seemed to be casting a long and dark influence over the family once more. The investigators realized that to truly understand what happened to David, they needed to consider the broader context of generational trauma and instability that had plagued the family. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, a chilling possibility emerged. Could there be more to David's injuries than an accidental fall? Was there a more disturbing truth hidden beneath layers of fear, neglect, and secrecy? The detectives knew they had to tread carefully but decisively. The well-being of the surviving children and the pursuit of justice for David depended on uncovering the whole truth. The investigators pressed further into Benella's account of the events, unraveling more inconsistencies in her explanations. The challenges facing the family were undeniable, but the gaps in Benella's story, coupled with her actions, or lack thereof, painted an increasingly grim picture. Bonella admitted that she did not immediately call for help when she found David unconscious. Instead, she turned to her computer, searching for answers online. "I wanted to check what causes unconsciousness," she explained. "How long someone can stay unconscious, and if they might just wake up on their own." The detectives were incredulous. "Most people wouldn't think to go online," one said. "They'd think about calling 911. Safety comes first." Bonella attempted to justify her actions, citing her previous encounters with Florida's Department of Children and Families, DCF. She feared that seeking help might lead to her children being taken away. "I didn't want them to think I wasn't taking care of my kids," she said defensively. "I have a roof over their heads, and I feed and care for them better than when I was with my ex-husband." But the detectives weren't convinced. "You were more worried about DCF than about saving your child's life," one detective noted pointedly. "Why didn't you call for help immediately? Why didn't you trust the system to guide you?" Adding to their concern, when David arrived at the hospital, it was clear his head injury wasn't his only trauma. His left leg was in a blue cast that stretched from his hip to his foot, a reminder of an earlier injury. In January, just a few months prior, David had broken his leg. According to a DCF report, Bonella claimed she was inside the apartment when Christian came rushing in, carrying David in his arms. She explained that the boys had been playing at the playground just outside their apartment. When asked if she had been supervising, Bonella admitted, "I wasn't out there with them, but I had the window open to look." The detectives pushed back. "If you weren't watching them, how do you know what happened?" Bonella faltered. "I didn't have my eyes on them the whole time," she admitted. "But I was listening." The story of David's broken leg raised even more questions. Bonella insisted it had been an accident, but her lack of supervision left investigators doubtful. It became harder to reconcile her claims with the evidence, and a pattern of neglect began to emerge. The detectives pressed her further about her choices, and Bonella's explanations grew increasingly defensive. She recounted the hardships she faced as a single mother, the fear of losing her children, and the struggles of raising 4 kids alone. Yet her attempts to elicit sympathy did little to erase the troubling facts. David's injuries were severe, his care had been delayed, and the circumstances surrounding both his broken leg and his head injury were shrouded in inconsistencies. Investigators couldn't ignore the bigger picture. Bonella's history revealed a series of challenges that went far beyond this single incident. She had become pregnant with Christian at just 11 years old, endured a tumultuous upbringing, and faced immense obstacles as a young mother. After marrying Luis Galarraga Blanco at 18, she had 3 more children, including David. However, her husband's recent death had left the family reeling. Police still hadn't uncovered the full details surrounding his death, but it loomed over the case as a dark and unresolved mystery. Now, with David's life hanging in the balance, the stakes were higher than ever. The investigators realized they were not just dealing with a single incident but a complex web of trauma, neglect, and questionable choices that had placed this vulnerable family in grave danger. As they continued to unravel the truth, they were determined to uncover whether David's injuries were truly accidents, or if something far more sinister was at play. As investigators delved deeper, they began uncovering a disturbing pattern of lies and omissions surrounding David's injuries. Bonella's explanation of David's broken leg in January was riddled with contradictions. She initially claimed he fell from monkey bars, only for police to discover that the apartment playground had no monkey bars at all. When confronted, Bonella changed her story to a fall from a jungle gym. Later, her sister added yet another version, stating David had been jumping from swing to swing when he fell. But the most shocking revelation came from Christian. His account was entirely different and implicated himself in an accident that Bonella had worked hard to cover up. When questioned about what happened in January, Christian admitted, "I was doing yoga with David. It wasn't on TV, I read about it in a book. He demonstrated how he had twisted David's leg unintentionally, explaining that he didn't know it would break. I wasn't trying to hurt him, he said, visibly distressed. Christian's story revealed another layer to the tragic events. Bonella had been absent during the incident, allegedly taking another child to school. The detectives were now faced with a young boy who had likely caused the injury by accident and a mother who had coerced him into lying to authorities. Christian admitted that he had told the Department of Children and Families, DCF, that David had fallen from the playground, a lie his mother had instructed him to say. When confronted, Bonella initially denied the allegations but eventually broke down. I was scared they'd take my kids away, she confessed. I thought if I just talked to Christian and made him realize what he had done, it would be enough. The detectives pushed further. But why wait 2 days to take him to the hospital, they asked. I didn't think it was serious, Bonella claimed. I thought it was just swollen. He wasn't screaming in pain, so I didn't think anything was broken. However, medical professionals later revealed that David's double fracture was one of the worst they had ever seen in a child his age, leaving no doubt about the severity of the injury. As the timeline unraveled, it became clear that Bonella had chosen to lie repeatedly, first to DCF, then to police, and even to herself, in an effort to protect her son and, ultimately, herself. But her actions had only compounded the tragedy. The investigation circled back to the events leading up to David's head injury, which left him unresponsive. Bonella's story began to waver yet again. She initially claimed she had taken David to the hospital within 40 minutes of returning home, but as detectives pressed her, the timeline shifted. It was about an hour, she said, then revised it again to closer to 2 hours. At one point, she admitted to calling a pediatrician rather than dialing 911, but she gave up when she was put on hold. The detectives were aghast. While your child was unconscious, you called a pediatrician instead of 911, one asked incredulously. Bonella's interrogation concluded with more questions than answers. But as the pieces of the story fell into place, the detectives turned their attention once more to Christian, hoping his honesty about David's broken leg would carry over to this case. When questioned again, Christian seemed reluctant but eventually began to open up. Tell me what happened, the investigator urged gently. Christian hesitated, his voice shaking. I didn't mean for it to happen, he finally said. It was an accident. As Christian explained his version of events, it became clear that David's injuries were not the result of a simple fall from a bunk bed. Instead, something far more troubling had occurred, and the truth behind the tragedy was finally beginning to emerge. By the early hours of March 15th, Christian had been awake all night, talking to detectives. His exhaustion was evident, and his shifting stories only deepened the mystery surrounding David's injuries. Detectives, aware of Christian's tumultuous background, tread carefully as they tried to uncover the truth. Christian's violent upbringing came sharply into focus. Just 3 months before David's leg injury, Christian had endured a horrific ordeal at the hands of his late stepfather, Luis Galarraga Blanco. Court documents revealed that in October 2010, Christian's middle school had called Bonella when they noticed his face was red and swollen. By the time Bonella arrived, police and DCF investigators were questioning Christian. Christian revealed that Luis had punched him in the face, causing severe injuries, including a torn retina that required surgery. The situation escalated tragically when Luis, upon learning police were coming to arrest him, took his own life in front of Christian and his siblings. A neighbor later found the children. Their 4-year-old sister opened the door, while David, then a toddler, was discovered in another room, reportedly shaking and covered in blood. This traumatic history weighed heavily on Christian, who had been subjected to cycles of violence and neglect throughout his young life. The detectives knew they needed to break through his fear and confusion to get to the truth. Christian, I just need you to tell us what really happened tonight, one detective urged. It's okay. You're not in trouble. We just need the truth to help David. Christian hesitated before offering another story. I had him carrying books, he said softly. Books? What kind of books? The detective asked. Skinny books from the bookshelf, Christian explained. He was carrying them, but then they fell on him. The detective pressed further. Where did the books fall? On his head? Christian nodded but seemed unsure of his own words. Yeah, they fell on his head. He doesn't know how to carry things right. Christian, the detective said gently, this side of David's head has a lot of bruising and swelling. His nose is swollen too. Books couldn't have caused that. Something else happened, didn't it? Christian's story shifted again. He admitted that David hadn't fallen from the bunk bed, contradicting the original explanation. The detectives continued probing. Did you push him? Did you do anything that could have caused his head to hit something? They asked. Christian shook his head. No. I just took the books away, and then he went to sleep. The detective leaned closer. Christian, his injuries are serious. They didn't just happen from carrying books. You know that, don't you? It's okay to tell the truth. The truth will help David. Christian looked down, his voice trembling. I didn't mean to hurt him, he whispered. I didn't know it would be so bad. The detectives remained patient, coaxing the details out of the boy. Bit by bit, Christian revealed that in a moment of frustration, he had accidentally caused David's head to strike the hard edge of the bed. Though unintentional, the impact was severe, and David's condition deteriorated rapidly after the incident. Detectives also learned that, instead of calling for immediate help, Bonella had spent crucial minutes trying to piece together a story to protect herself and her children from DCF intervention. Her decision to delay treatment had left David's life hanging by a thread. As the case unfolded, the devastating truth came to light. David's injuries were not the result of a single incident but rather a culmination of neglect, trauma, and an unstable household environment. The detectives now faced the heartbreaking task of holding those responsible accountable while ensuring the surviving children would no longer endure such conditions. As the interview stretched on, Christian's exhaustion and emotional turmoil became more evident. The detective, sensing his inner conflict, offered reassurance. You don't have to keep hiding this inside, she said softly. What are you scared of? You can tell me. Christian hesitated, his voice trembling. I don't know. When he wouldn't budge on his story, the detective shifted her approach, pressing him for more details. Did you push him? She asked directly. Did you hit him with something on his head? Christian shook his head before finally admitting, I pushed him against the bookshelf. Why did you push him? The detective asked. Tears welled in Christian's eyes. I was angry, he said. About what my stepdad did to me. The weight of his words hung heavy in the room. Christian described how, in a moment of anger and frustration, he pushed David twice into the bookshelf. The first time, he cried, Christian admitted. The second time, he stopped crying and went unconscious. The detectives were shocked by the confession but pressed on to uncover more. How did the blood get everywhere in the room? They asked. Christian explained that he had tried to carry David to the bottom bunk bed after realizing what he'd done. He was bleeding from his nose and mouth, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know what to do. Later that morning, when Bonella returned home, she found David unconscious and bleeding. Instead of rushing him to the hospital, she cleaned him up and loaded the other children into the car, dropping them off at school. Hours passed with David lying unresponsive in the apartment. During that time, Bonella casually surfed the internet, searching phrases like, when someone gets knocked out, and, how to wake someone from a concussion. She also spent time looking up screensavers, downloading music, and even browsing celebrity gossip. Detectives confronted Christian again about the severity of David's injuries. They gently pushed him to explain the events in more detail. Christian described carrying his little brother, unsure of how to hold him properly, leaving bloodstains on his clothes. His actions, though misguided, were clearly those of a scared and confused child. Bonella's failure to act quickly was equally damning. Instead of calling 911, she let precious time slip away while David's brain began to swell from the impact. Christian, in his innocence, asked the detective what brain swelling meant, revealing a potential gap in his ability to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation. When detectives finally confronted Bonella with Christian's confession, she was visibly shaken. "I didn't know," she repeated, over and over. But her previous actions, delaying medical care, coercing Christian into lying, and attempting to downplay the situation, spoke louder than her words. The detectives now had a clearer picture of what had happened. Christian's anger, born from years of abuse and neglect, had tragically been misdirected at his younger brother. David's injuries were not the result of a single mistake but a culmination of systemic failure, a chaotic home environment, and unresolved trauma. As Christian's confession came to a close, the detective asked one final question. "Why did you push him twice?" Christian's voice was barely audible. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't even know why I pushed him the first time." David's fate remained uncertain, and the detectives prepared to confront Bonella with the full scope of their findings. The heartbreaking truth was now clear. This tragedy was not just about one moment of violence but a lifetime of pain and neglect that had spiraled out of control. By March 16, 2011, 2 days after David sustained his devastating injuries, the case reached its heartbreaking conclusion. Doctors made the difficult decision to remove David from life support. His injuries, which included a fractured skull, broken nose, swelling, and internal damage, were simply too severe for recovery. The autopsy confirmed the cause of death, homicide due to blunt force trauma to the head. Even more devastating, medical professionals stated that had Bonella sought immediate medical attention, David might have survived. Instead, hours of inaction sealed his tragic fate. The final pieces of evidence against Bonella began to fall into place. Her search history revealed that at 3:07 p.m., hours after David's head injury, she looked up the hospital where she would eventually take him. However, she delayed even further, picking up her other children from school and returning home again before finally arriving at the hospital at 5:30 p.m., a full 8 hours after the incident. Adding to the suspicion, investigators were unable to find any records of Bonella visiting the ATM at the time she claimed, further undermining her credibility. The picture of neglect, dishonesty, and fatal delay became undeniable. Christian, overwhelmed by guilt and the weight of his actions, finally broke. Through tears, he admitted his anger had boiled over that morning, leading him to push David into the bookshelf. The actions, he insisted, were not meant to be fatal. But as Christian reckoned with his emotions, it became clear the consequences of that moment would forever alter his life. If this story moved you, made you think, or shed light on the impact of trauma and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that uncover the hidden truths behind real-life events. Like this video if you believe in the importance of justice and second chances, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue to bring you stories that matter. Christian was arrested immediately following his questioning. Despite his young age, just 12 years old, Florida law allowed him to be charged as an adult for first-degree murder. This decision made Christian the youngest person in Duval County, Florida, to face such charges. Florida's legal system permits children of any age to be charged as adults for capital offenses, those punishable by death or life in prison. Though Christian's young age and traumatic history would eventually be factors in his defense, the severity of the crime left authorities with few options. Christian's mother, Bonella, was arrested 2 weeks later and charged with aggravated manslaughter. Her neglect and repeated dishonesty were pivotal in David's death, with investigators emphasizing that timely medical intervention could have saved her son's life. She eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The judge credited her with the 2 years and 4 months she had already served in jail and suspended the rest of her sentence, placing her on probation. The case of David's death sent shockwaves through Florida and beyond, highlighting failures in both the household and systemic levels. Christian, a boy shaped by years of violence and neglect, had lashed out in a moment of frustration, and his actions led to a tragic loss of life. Benella's inaction and repeated lies compounded the situation, ensuring that David did not receive the help he desperately needed. While Christian's trial raised questions about the appropriateness of charging children as adults, it also brought attention to the long-term effects of abuse and trauma on young minds. Christian's cognitive and emotional development lagged behind his peers, a fact made clear during his confession, when he struggled to comprehend basic medical terms like swelling. David's short life and tragic death served as a stark reminder of the importance of early intervention, proper parenting, and the systemic changes needed to support families in crisis. The case remains one of the most harrowing examples of how unresolved trauma and neglect can lead to unthinkable consequences. After Benella's sentencing, she was ordered to spend 90 days in the Hubbard House, a domestic violence shelter, followed by 2 years at a halfway house as part of her rehabilitation. Meanwhile, Christian's case garnered widespread public attention, sparking a national debate about justice for minors charged with serious crimes. Letters poured into the court, many in support of Christian, pleading with the judge to try him as a juvenile rather than an adult. One letter included a petition with nearly 9,000 signatures from around the world, calling for compassion and rehabilitation rather than harsh punishment. Ultimately, the public outcry and Christian's unique circumstances influenced the court's decision. A plea deal was reached, reducing the charges from first-degree murder to aggravated battery and manslaughter. Christian was sentenced to 7 years in a juvenile detention facility, where he would receive counseling and support aimed at addressing his traumatic upbringing and cognitive development delays. If this story moved you, made you think, or shed light on the impact of trauma and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that uncover the hidden truths behind real-life events. Like this video if you believe in the importance of justice and second chances, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue to bring you stories that matter. On his 19th birthday in 2018, Christian was released from detention, having served his full sentence. His journey toward rebuilding his life continued under close supervision. He successfully completed his probation, which was officially terminated in May 2023. Since his release, Christian has taken significant steps toward creating a stable and productive life. According to his social media, he now works as a barber, a skill he likely developed during his time in the juvenile system. His Instagram posts suggest a focus on positivity and moving forward, offering a glimpse of hope that he has found a path away from the cycle of violence and trauma that once defined his life. Christian's story remains a deeply polarizing and haunting case. It highlights the complexities of justice for minors, the long-term impact of abuse, and the societal responsibility to intervene in cases of neglect and violence. While Christian's release and transition to a new life offer a measure of closure, David's tragic death continues to serve as a reminder of the critical need for early intervention and support for at-risk children. For Benella, the road has been less clear. Though she completed her sentence and rehabilitation requirements, her actions and inactions remain a focal point in discussions about accountability and parental responsibility in the face of tragedy. The case, with its twists and heartbreaking outcomes, remains a cautionary tale of what happens when unresolved trauma, neglect, and systemic failures collide.